With the latest season at Dark Realm on World of Tanks console, we had some huge changes to crew skills, and there has been a ton of complaining throughout all of the different bits of the community with regards to people losing loading time. And I think a lot of this is probably not really thought of, to be honest, is that everyone also received nerfs to the amount of reload. So literally every tank in the game doesn't have as much reload, which basically means none of them do. And it also meant that tanks that had ridiculous alpha also now have more of a disadvantage because of the fact that they aren't firing as often and they can get farmed a little bit easier when they're playing in the game. And so I think a lot of the people complaining probably just haven't had that much experience with playing with a game that basically has that change to loading time. And if you are one of those people, I'm not saying that you have a bad idea or anything like that. I'm just saying that in all honesty, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference because what happened is basically everyone was using that crew skill anyway. So now you just basically have a free crew skill slot that you wouldn't have had previously. And because we've had the crew changes, I wanted to go into an actual crew skill evaluation and give some thoughts on why the new crew system is way better, like actually way better. It is so much more game opening, and I think it's probably one of the best changes for the gameplay wise and for creating fun in the game in a long time, because there are some crazy things that you can do with a wide variety of tanks. So let's jump into a crew and I'll give a little bit of a rundown as to some of the things that you can see now compared to what you had to do last time, when basically the first 7 perks were basically all the same on any tank class regardless of what you were playing. Now that is just simply not the case. There's so much more variety and it's very individual with regards to the tank. So anyone asking for me to do a crew skill guide for, you know, one like a generic thing, it's very difficult to actually cover the variety of tanks that are in the game, because now you actually do have to think a little bit more about the specific tank. But we can go over some of the more dominating perks with regards to the game. Obviously, we saw with the latest update that Sixth Sense is now actually part of the standard crew skill. So you now have that as standard on all of your crews, which is very big. Lots of people didn't take this for some unbeknownst reason. I have no idea why, because it was so powerful. It gave you so much information that you didn't have previously. And that is really big for, you know, thinking about the game, how to play the game, because any old monkey can basically come on and learn how to aim, where the weak points are of tanks. Like, it really isn't that difficult. That just comes with playing a lot. But it's that level of positioning and stuff that's going to make you into a really good player. So like someone that's learnt the game in terms of aiming, the mechanics of the game, so like, you know, spotting, you're going to be able to get to like 54% win rate. But above that, it's all about positioning, where you're going to be, how you're going to get to damage, how you're going to be able to impact the game, and all of the other stuff that comes more so from like the strategy side of the game that is going to actually enable you to become a really good player within the game. So you can learn all the mechanics and everything. It isn't going to get you so far because there's only so much aiming and stuff, and if you're putting yourself in the wrong situation, a lot of the time you're not going to be able to carry games and win more games as a result. So crew skills, coming back to that, obviously Sixth Sense very powerful as it was previously, so now it is in the game as standard. So that frees up another slot, and there's loads of more free slots because of the fact that they've combined certain crew skills into one, which makes them more usable and more interesting. But we just grabbed a random commander that we had, and basically we are going to have a look at essentially checking out some perks and stuff that are usable, give you some ideas for some builds, and give you an idea that I made for a recent build for the T95 as an example, which has become really crazy what you can do with some of the specific tanks, especially when you consider how powerful they are just on the tank on its own. But you can really make them shine and make them fun to play, which is something that hasn't been the case for a long time. So, Born Leader. obviously, this is probably the guaranteed perk you'll have on every single tank that you play because of the fact that it is just a simple flat 5% increase to skill effectiveness and crew performance. This basically buffs your skill effectiveness. So say you have, for example, I don't know, a 10% increase to your reload speed, for example. And so that means that when this perk is added, you're going to get 0.5 of a second or 0.5% extra added on to whatever skill that you've put on. So on a 9 skill commander, you're effectively getting 45% distributed across loads of different crew skills, essentially, because the more skills that you have, the more that this is impacting each one of those different skills. So it becomes very, very effective, and it's really, really useful. It basically makes all of the skills that you're putting on your commander that little bit better. It's not a huge amount per skill, but it does make them better. And then obviously the crew performance comes in with things like track repair speed, view range, all of that sort of stuff. That is also getting buffed by 5%. So on its own, just having skill effectiveness, it would be usable. Like I would use this on all of my crews. Now, it also has the crew performance. It did get a slight nerf because before it used to be 10%, I believe. And so now they've nerfed it a little bit, but it's still very, very usable. And I'd pretty much run it on every single one of your tanks. It does buff up your reload as well, just not as much as it did before. So really, really powerful. That's about the only guaranteed one I would run on every single one of my tanks. And now what we have is we also have situational awareness. So this is a buff to max view range. This is very, very powerful as well. And it's probably one I would use on almost every single one of my tanks, unless I'm playing like a super heavy that's really not going to be able to use view range. But even then, very, very useful because of the fact that maybe you would get outspotted if you didn't have it on. And then with it on, you might not get outspotted when someone's shooting at you. So really, really powerful. I'd probably have this on everything as well. So those are the two skills that are basically haven't really changed between the two modes. Then we've got Snapshot. This is quite powerful as well. It basically improves your accuracy during the rotation of your turret. So say you're looking one way and someone gets spotted over to the left, it basically increases your accuracy. So the bloom at which you're basically going to be able to see people when you're moving the turret. So that is really powerful as well. And basically due to all of the accuracy nerfs that we've received over the last few months, whereby they've removed steady aim, which was just a flat 10% reduction in accuracy, improved accuracy, that is like a reduction in the overall dispersion of your main armament when you're firing. So Snapshot accuracy, getting at least one of them in there is really, really good. So yeah, Snapshot, very usable as well. Obviously if you've got a turret. If you haven't got a turret, it's not going to help. So yeah, basically TDs that don't have a turret, not going to be usable, get rid of it. And then this is where the realms start to come into more thinking about what tank you're playing. So if you're playing like a TD, you're playing something that's trying to be sneaky, it doesn't have a lot of armor, you're not really going to bounce a lot of rounds. You know, sometimes it's worth speccing into camo, so being able to remove some of that RNG element of getting spotted sometimes, although it's not really RNG, but you know, you can basically reduce how often you're getting spotted and therefore hit by someone else. So that is basically like avoiding damage potentially when you're actually running around in your vehicles. So it's really powerful and something I think a lot of people should be running in the game because of the fact that, yeah, you're going to avoid the damage, especially on like lightly armored vehicles. Light tanks should definitely have it. It is a guaranteed. So camo expertise, really, really powerful. 7.5% increase to vehicles camo factor. So just absolutely crazy. Combined with green thumb is just, if you are a light tank, this is more useful. Or if you're playing a TD, you can basically sit in a bush and you're going to have an increase to the vehicle's camo factor. So you're going to be even more undetectable when you're in a bush. So it doesn't work outside of a bush, which is why it's less effective than camo expertise, because, you know, it is situational. Not all of the time you're going to be in a bush. So whilst it does give you a bigger boost to your camo factor, you know, you also have to weigh it up against, well, it's only a 2.5% increase and I'm not going to be in a bush all of the time. So it's like a secondary camo perk. So it's still worth it if you're going into camo on your tank that you're playing. So something like a Borsig, an Iron Rain, a Grilla 15, a Batchat 12T, a AMX 1375, you know, all of the light tanks that are quite small, using it, very powerful. And if you're a bigger tank, it's less useful because of the fact that, you know, you're not going to be able to fit all of your tank in a bush, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's basically that. And then, so yeah, I would highly recommend Camo Expertise, Situational Awareness, Born Leader, and then Snapshot on almost all of your turreted vehicles. That is kind of 4 of the 9 perks that you can pick, or skills as they're now called. And then we start getting into the actual realms where it is like, what do I take? Because the skills themselves have been changed. A lot of them have been combined into one with the latest update. So there's quite a realm for picking something that is going to suit the tank that you're playing. So if I go to my T95 as an example. Now the T95, you can get the gist of what it is. It's a hold down monster if you can hide that small lower plate, but even if it's out in the open, it's absolutely fine because that lower plate is so small, and with the accuracy nerfs it makes the armor a little bit stronger. It does have big cupolas which can be penned by basically everything as long as they're actually aiming properly, and if they've got premium rounds it's just not very fun with the cupolas. But it is supposed to be like an armored, brutal, you know, breakthrough vehicle that's going to be able to go down a flank and deal with opponents. So what stops a breakthrough tank? What is going to stop you from being able to advance? What is going to stop you from being able to, you know, use your non-turreted TD? It doesn't have a turret. How are we going to be able to deal with that? What can we do to make the tank better? Well, there's quite a few things. So if we go into the commander that I've set this tank up with, now this is probably not the most optimal for like going for damage or something like that. But sometimes damage also comes from being able to survive longer or being able to be more flexible in positions and stuff like that. So it's like swings and roundabouts. If you go only for pure damage, but you're really inflexible, so you can't really, you know, maneuver and stuff like that, or you get bogged down in certain areas because of the fact that you didn't have certain crew skills, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage because you can't get to the damage. And when you do, maybe everything's been taken out, or maybe there's just so many tanks left alive that, you know, you're not able to get any damage because they all just dogpile you and then you're done. So, you know, there's swings and roundabouts. And so what we did with the T95 in particular, and I'll do a video on this because I love this tank. It has so many fun and cool things that you can do with it, and maybe even play the E3 in a similar sort of fashion. There's so many build videos that I'm going to do over the next couple of weeks where we're experimenting. If you have any ideas or you've made some really weird, I don't care if they're competitive, if they're good, if they're fun or just interesting or something completely just out of the blue, then let me know in the comment section down below. I am really interested to just try out all of these weird build configurations with various different tanks because it's just been opened up. I love it. So obviously, T95, the reason why we're going to get bogged down is because our tracks get blown off or we are outmaneuvered by someone. And so how can we combat that? Well, with some of the changes to the skills, we've actually seen that some of them have been combined into one. And you've also seen that some of the less useful ones have actually been buffed. So some of the speeds and stuff like that have been buffed slightly from what they previously were to make them more competitive, to make them more choosable when you're looking at your perks. Because it's a trade-off. If you pick one perk over another one, you're losing out on the other perk. So you want to make sure that the perk you got gives you the biggest buff to the tank that you're playing compared to another one. And so when we look at the T95, obviously being able to turn quickly, this is going to be really important in a tank that is very, very slow to turn like the T95. And if an opponent slightly gets around the side of us, maybe the 7.5% increase to the vehicle's whole rotation speed allows us to turn just quick enough to get that shot in, whereas if we didn't have it, maybe they get round us that little bit quicker and we can't actually get a shot in. So that could cost us an entire shot worth of damage. Maybe they don't actually ever get taken out because we missed that shot. And so that is really where things like this are really important. So clutch braking on the T95. Then what else do we do? Well, off-road driving gives you 7.5% increased handling on medium and a soft terrain. So if we're in like a bogged down area, something that is not particularly useful, like say we're not on a road, it's much harder to turn on, boggy terrain. And so being able to increase the handling, which also impacts the ability to go faster, it also impacts the ability to turn, is going to help us in those situations where someone tries to get around, or if we're trying to get to damage, it helps us maintain a decent level of speed compared to not having it. So off-road driving also helps and works in tandem with clutch braking. And then we went for situational awareness, that's just simply so we get max view range. We went for run and gun, so that because we're in a slow tank, the accuracy is relatively low as it stands when you're moving, because it doesn't get to bloom out. When you're playing a light tank driving around at 70 kilometers an hour and you're trying to aim at someone, the bloom or the accuracy of the main armament is much worse. You're looking down the scope, you see in the circle get like half of the screen, and so it's unlikely that you're going to hit. Whereas with run and gun and a slower tank, you're actually more accurate because of the fact you can't go those 70 kilometers an hour top speed. You're probably sat at around 15 to 20 kilometers an hour in the T95, depending on a few factors with regards to equipment and that sort of thing. So run and gun is very useful. It makes us very accurate. And whilst I would use it on light tanks as well, just to buff up the accuracy too, it's just useful for the T95 because it's not on a turret. We don't need to have a turret to use this. It just makes us super accurate. We can plow rounds into people whilst moving forward towards them, as whilst we're avoiding getting tracked because of something else that we'll talk about in a second, being able to turn quickly. We're just going to have more accuracy. Then situational awareness, more view range, as we talked about, is going to help us spot people. Radio jamming, this is a new skill that was added in, and it's basically decreasing the time spotted by enemies. So because of the fact that we saw increases to the time, especially in Cold War, where you get spotted for, so it went from 5 seconds to 10 seconds as like a base. So if you get spotted, you're spotted for 10 seconds in Cold War instead of 5, what it was previously. This is really useful because it can reduce your time that you're spotted, and therefore, when people know exactly where you are on the map, exactly what you're doing, and it really helps out. So on World War II, it's also very useful because we can remain undetected for longer. It means people aren't going to be able to see us. It makes our repositioning a little bit better. We can maneuver around. And whilst it's useful more on something that's a bit faster, where you can reposition a lot more in those 3 seconds, it's still useful because maybe you go behind a building, someone doesn't know which way you're looking, and so because of that extra 3 seconds, whereas if they had another 3 seconds of seeing where you are, if you turn to face a different way, they know that you've turned to face a different way because of those extra 3 seconds, whereas it gives a bit more mystery as to what you're going to be doing when you're running radio jamming, so it can help you out with those clutch situations where maybe you're 1 versus 3. And then we move into armor angling. So this is just a 5% decrease in damage received, which I don't really like. I think it should just give you 5% increased health, because I find it very frustrating as a player who is trying to farm damage potentially, that maybe you're getting like pushed by someone, and so you're like, okay, I can take them out. I have the alpha to do so. I really wish that they did change it to buff your HP rather than decrease how much damage you receive, because of the fact that, like, say someone has 400 health left in the game. My alpha is 400, so on average, if I roll perfectly exactly what I should be doing, I deal 400 damage. And so I know, okay, I have a good chance that I'm going to remove this guy in one shot, so I can make a play that does that. I have no idea if this person has armor angling, and so I could deal 395 damage to this person, or if we're being actually realistic, it would be 380 damage. So I go, hello rolled, damn it. But in reality, actually no, I needed that tank to be on 380 health to remove him. And whilst you can do that in game, it makes it a lot harder to be like, okay, my alpha takeaway for like 5% is going to be 386.2 or something if you've got a weird number. And then you go, the guy has 308. Like, it's just much harder than just being like, my alpha is 400. This guy has 400 health left. I can take him out if I roll average. If I low roll, that's just RNG. And whereas this just, I don't know why they don't just buff the health, but either way, it decreases the damage we're receiving from any opponent. So it's basically just 5% extra health in your games, which could be the difference between getting an extra shot in every single game, especially if you're playing like a mouse. 5% of 3,000, you're looking at an extra 150 health, I think, if my maths is correct, yeah. So instead of, maybe that means you can take an extra shell from a 400 damage gun, because there's only, like, they go up in increments, you know, you can have 400, 400, 400, 400 all the way up. And so maybe you take an extra shot, and so that means you survive longer and you can get an extra shot yourself, or maybe that means that you win the game because you get extra health, so you don't just get one shot at the end by someone, and so maybe you win. So that's quite useful in those tanks that are reliant on survivability, which the T95 is. And then we go general mechanic. This is to keep our track repair speed, because we are pushing forward in the T95. We want to keep our tracks up at all times. So we want to make sure that if we do get tracked, it's not going to be for a long time. So 10% increase to repair speed of all damage modules. So that includes tracks, as well as, you know, if you get your ammo rack taken out, it repairs faster. Or like, you know, your gun gets taken out, even it will repair 10% faster if you don't have a repair kit, etc. So that's useful, but it's mainly for the tracks. And then track mechanic, 25% increase to track repair speed, combined with the actual general mechanic, is going to give us a 35% in total. So we can put our tracks back on 35% faster, which may mean like an extra 1.5 seconds of time that we're not actually tracked. So that is really big. And we can repair our tracks really quickly. We can turn, we can maneuver, we can keep going with this tank and just basically demolish through a lot of the opponents and keep on pressing the advantage, which is what the T95 is all about. So yeah, and to be honest, we haven't really traded off a huge amount in order to do that, and it works very well for the tank. So what would you do? You could go for a camo build on the T95, but then is it as fun? Not really. Maybe you do a little bit more damage because you know you're sniping, but are you going to be forward as much? Are you going to be able to have those crazy games? I don't know. So yeah, I think that, you know, it opens up the floor to a bit more, because we haven't got these like 7 crew skills that you have to take on all tanks because they are just so powerful. It's opened up that realm. And then obviously we also got the removal of enhanced target info, and it was given out as standard on all of the different tanks that you're playing. So with the crew skills changes that we've seen, we also then got the equipment changes, whereby some equipment have been combined into one piece of equipment that does both of the things as the previous. And then obviously we got some equipment that was just removed, and then some equipment that's been added as new. And so with these new pieces of equipment, with the new changes, how they've been made, you can combine those with the crew skills that you've made really specific to the tank that you're playing, and then use equipment that is also very specific to the tank that you're playing. And whilst there is some powerful ones, like for example, I would usually take gun rammer on absolutely every single vehicle in the game that I'm using, which is why I think that adding things like this doesn't really give you much of an incentive. And whilst they did nerf how much gun rammer actually does to the loading time, it used to be 10%, now it's 7.5%. It still doesn't really, like, I'm going to use this in pretty much every tank I'm playing, just because everybody else is probably using gun rammer. And, you know, if you're on a 1v1 against the same tank and you're both a one shot, you're just going to lose because the other tank is going to reload faster than you. So that is also a very useful thing, and it also sacrifices your DPM, which is one of the reasons that you get more damage in your games. If you're like used to constantly pushing out damage, and especially as a more experienced player, that's going to be very important, because you're just going to reload faster, you can impact the game faster. And then we move into some other bits of equipment that are, you know, very useful, like for example coated optics, 10% increase to view range, very powerful. I would use this on most vehicles unless I'm going for an interesting build. But so that's 2 pieces of equipment that I'll pretty much use on all of those tanks. But that's really where it kind of ends in terms of like the ones that I will use on pretty much every single one of my tanks, because now we don't have things that are like necessary on every single tank. And whilst there's going to be a meta like, you know, having more camo is useful with improved concealment, they changed how the improved concealment works, so it doesn't give as much concealment as it did to everything like heavies and stuff like that. And they did add in extra pieces of equipment which now are useful. They removed silent driving, which allowed you to have reduced camo penalty while moving by 55%. They've made it into an equipment now, so that is really strong on things like mediums and tank destroyers that are trying to remain hidden, because it means you can move without having such a negative impact of moving on your camo. And so yeah, with those two out of the way, we then open up the floor to two other pieces of equipment on every tank, because we got an extra equipment slot that we didn't really use because of the fact that we pretty much had to have enhanced target info as standard on every single vehicle, because it was just so strong, and it was very negatively impact you if you didn't have it, because it just meant you couldn't see outlines of tanks behind bushes, which meant, you know, you're going to bounce a lot of shots, you're going to not know where tanks are. And whilst if you're playing a heavy tank, you're up close and personal, you can see where the tank is, it's still not great. It's still like annoying. And yeah, the enhanced target info is now as standard, so now we get an extra slot, and that means opening up to more specific stuff. So you can have 2 extra slots of specific to your tank stuff. So because we're going for the T95 track build, track repair speed, the pushing forward, we went with full reinforced suspension, which gives our tracks an extra 50% more health. So tracks and modules have health in the game. And that means that essentially for every damaging shot that you receive in that module, it can damage it. And so when it reaches 0 health, it will be destroyed. So that's why maybe your gun gets hit and it gets destroyed. And so same with tracks. So when your tracks get hit with a decent amount of damage to them, they get tracked and you get put down into the mud and you're stuck there. And so track durability going to give us extra amounts of time that we can not be tracked. And when we are tracked, we're going to repair them really, really quickly. So really, really useful for those slower tanks that are trying to charge forward and not get delayed by, you know, a pesky light tank who keeps shooting your tracks and keeping you in place. And so very, very fun to use on the T95. And then we're using Toolbox, which is giving us a 30% increased speed of repair. So this is essentially added to the bonuses that we got from our crew skills, which were, if you remember, 35%. We're adding an extra 30% onto that. So we've got 65% more repair speed of our tracks. And then we obviously have 50% more health of those tracks. So combining all of these together, this becomes an unstoppable Goliath, which can turn really quickly compared to what you would expect from a T95. It has much better terrain resistances, so it can keep its top speed throughout all of the crappy terrains that you get within the game. And so, yeah, it becomes really, really fun, interesting, and I love it. And whilst you could take additional grousers for whole rotation speed, maybe I would drop off ventilation to do so, so we can turn even quicker and get better handling on the terrain. In fact, you know what? Because I'm going to be doing a video on this, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And of course, it's taken off the wrong piece of equipment. There we go. So that is kind of the setup that we're going. So we've even dropped off vents so we can get even more speed that we're going to be turning. So very, very powerful. You could go for turbocharger, which gives you more speed and horsepower. And I would have rather them did what PC did, where it just gives you a flat amount of more speed, because light tanks are already very fast, and so that is what gets boosted the most on a light tank. So if you've got 70 kilometers an hour, 5% of 70 is going to give you 3.5% extra, 3.5 kilometers an hour top speed more. Whereas if you're using it on a tank that goes 15, 5% of 15 is like 0.75 kilometers an hour faster. So you would never use it on literally for the sake of speed on a tank that really doesn't move, which is what the tanks that are really slow really need. They need the extra speed. And so why would you ever use a turbocharger? And on a light tank, you don't really need the speed anyway, because you're going to be super fast unless you were going for a weird speed build, which is perfectly fine. But, you know, I think turbo should be a flat increase to the amount of top forward speed that you're getting to help out heavy tanks in the game, and also those slower tanks, tank destroyers and stuff like that, that, to be honest with you, slow heavily armored things are not actually that great in the current meta on console. So helping those out a little bit would be beneficial. So I would go to a flat increase to the kilometers an hour rather than the flat 5% increase to the speed of the tank. So yeah, very interesting builds, and that's just the T95. You know, that is one instance of a type of tank that you can play, and so that's why I think it's so interesting that we've got these crew skill changes. We no longer feel like we're forced into using the same pieces of equipment on the same tanks, and I think as soon as you start to experiment with it and you start thinking like, cool, my tank is like really accurate, so I don't need any accuracy buffs. I'm just going to slam it all into camo, and I'm going to go full camo, and I'm going to be a little stealthy little rat that goes around all of the bushes, moving around using low noise exhaust system, so I don't get as much camo like negatives when I'm moving, and I can reposition and I can use my medium tank in a really weird way that wasn't possible previously, because you just had to have the extra view range, the extra damage per minute, and you had to use the enhanced target info, and you had to use like ventilation, or you had to use camo net or something. Now it really opens up that realm as to playing tanks in different ways that can be so interesting, and I think you guys should definitely test it out. And for those saying like, oh, this is terrible update, I hate it, that's probably just because you're not used to it. The game used to be like this, and in fact used to have less options for your crew skills back then, because even then we had to use the same piece of equipment. Now we have more skill slots, we have more uses, and whilst we have less total skill slots than what we used to, because it used to be linear, like you had to get so much XP and you could get 15 skills, basically every skill on your commander that was in the game, it wasn't realistic for anyone that played the game normally, whereas 9 skill commanders are realistic, and it also stops, you know, the sweaty people like me or some of the top players in the game or stuff like that from being able to get even more overpowered with 15 skill crews and stuff like that. So it gives more of an incentive to everyone to be on a more even playing field and test out new stuff. So yeah, I am loving this update. I cannot wait to test out those weird builds and get into the game, and hopefully you'll see that through some of the videos. We're going to create wacky builds. Leave your builds in the description or the comment down below. Obviously comments, not description, but yeah, leave them down there. I will maybe test those out, and we'll see what happens with all of that going forward. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. The game is back, and I think it is going to be better for the long run on health of the game going forward. So quite a long video. I wanted to go in depth, my thoughts on what I think about the thing. I'm not right. You know, we all have an opinion. I'm sure some of you absolutely hate the changes, but all I can say is just give it a go, and then we can have a better opinion as to what it is. Maybe my opinion will change in like a couple months, and there'll be some changes that need tweaking. Remember, this is the first installment of it, so it's not going to be perfect, but I'm sure as we get more equipment coming into the game and making sure that you guys are putting in your requests, what equipment would you like to see in the game? What do you think could change the game? What piece of equipment, what skills would you like to see added that aren't in the game already? I think that's really cool. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and join me back tomorrow with the next video on World of Tanks console. See you there. Goodbye.